Welcome to WMB Church Live on Facebook. We're so glad you joined us. We're back. And this month is Mental Health Month for WMB Church. We have I've had a few guests already that have been talking about the importance of mental health. Beginning of May was Mental Health Week in Canada. And the Canadian Mental Health Association had this slogan, #GetReal. Don't go uncomfortably numb, but get real about how you feel and name it. Don't numb it. And we really believe that every week should be Mental Health Week. And so the goal of this month has been to destigmatize mental health challenges, but also to provide supports and talk to experts about the various supports that you have, and to increase your toolkit for dealing with mental health challenges, with anxiety, with stress, depression, both in work, but also in home and in life. So today we have a special guest that I've recorded last week because she can't be with us right now. She's got lots of clients and appointments. Her name is Dr. Rebecca Shemain, and she's a registered clinical psychologist and is part of the WMB community. She has worked at Grand River Hospital, specializing in eating disorders early in her career. And after becoming a parent of two twin teenagers now, Rebecca decided to pursue a private practice that she's been enjoying for about 20 years. And so we look forward to hearing of her conversation, really insightful. Again, those tools for our toolkit to deal with anxiety, stress, and other challenges. So, welcome to WMB Live. We want it to be informal. Today's is recorded, but I'll be around to answer questions. And if there's any comments, please post them in the chat. Remember to engage in the conversation, ask your questions, like this post, comment on it, share with your friends. It will be helpful, I know, to listen to this. And we're really excited to have one of our own WMBers to talk to us about this. But also be sure to follow WMB Church's Facebook Live community and our page. And you see the scroll there. Join our Facebook group, WMB Church Community. So let me know that you're here. Hi, Mary. Great to see you. Trish, Lori, thanks for coming. And we'll look forward to what Rebecca has to say. So why don't we jump into that? As people are joining, they can join, but we'll warm up, and I'll share this recording with you. And I hope you enjoy it. Again, I'll be here, so please chat and comment with me. If there's questions, I'll try and answer as we go. Okay, so let's see if we can do this. Well, Rebecca, it's so good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to this conversation. And I wonder if we could start by you just telling us a bit about yourself, your family, and maybe your practice.
Absolutely. Yep. Paul, so thank you so much. It's a really exciting opportunity, a new one for me. I've not done anything like this, so I think it's, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have been practicing for over 20 years now. I took the path, started at Grand River Hospital, and then decided that private practice was going to be the path for me. I wanted to be there for our daughters. We have twin girls that are 15 now. So married and have a family, and really wanted to ensure that we had the balance kind of as much as we could possibly achieve. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I'm a generalist in my private practice. I had specialized in eating disorders, but in the context of being a solo practitioner, I couldn't sustain something like that population alone. So I see everything and anything. Did work a lot with children and adolescents up until a few years ago. And I decided to kind of shift things more and focus more on adults at this point.
Okay. And you've been at WMB for how many years?
Well, it's been several years. The girls were quite young. Yeah, absolutely. So a long time.
I remember the curly-haired twins running around.
That's right. That's right.
And your mom has been there for years as well.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. So, but it's, with COVID, we haven't seen people in
No,
14 months. And
I know,
so, yeah,
I
we
know,
kind of forget who's around.
I
And
know.
so it's so good to see you. And
Oh,
yeah,
likewise.
I miss your smiling face in the
Oh,
foyer
thank you, Paul.
saying hi.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So tell me a bit about your interest around the mental health of children, youth, families,
Yeah.
adults. Yeah. What has brought you to this practice?
Well, I was thinking about that as I saw the question, and it's so funny because it felt foreign to me. I'm like, what does he mean by that? Like, it's always just been part of me. So, I mean, if you were to know like my story, I was a teenager really when I decided that I wanted to work with kids. So I worked in an art camp. Art is actually my first love, and worked at an
Oh,
art camp when I was an adolescent and wanted to become then an art therapist. And I had someone say to me early on, well, why would you just focus on art therapy? Why wouldn't you become a psychologist? And that made a lot of sense to me. So at 17, I knew that this is what I wanted. And I set my sights on that. And I feel very privileged to do what I do. So I think for me, like it's always been front and center in terms
mm,
of this has always been important. And now we see that, I mean, unfortunately, things are really there's more strain, there's more struggle probably than ever before, and there's more awareness too, which is a really good thing, right? That people are talking more about mental health, and actually it feels a little bit more legitimized than I think
mm.
it has been in the past.
Yeah, you've had quite a long career, and so I'm sure you've seen things ebb and flow in the culture. Particularly this year, what were some of the things that you saw before COVID, and how has COVID made things more challenging for people?
Yeah, before I think certainly in my practice, anxiety, depression, those were probably the most common pieces that you would see. I also deal a lot with obsessive compulsive disorder and those types of things. But I think the way I reflected on it as I was taking notes yesterday was really about like it was the toolbox. Like one of the things that I really like to do with clients is equip them with skills to be able to feel like they are gaining competence and coping
Mm,
strategies and developing skills that will help them manage the various mental health struggles. And we had more options before COVID, right? Now during this time you're seeing a really there's still the basics, and I have like more than 10 points for you later on in terms of very tangible things that we can do to help ourselves. But I think a lot of people, and depending if you're an extrovert, I think a lot of the social experiences obviously are so limited
yeah.
that I have clients saying to me, like, I'm doing all the things I know to do, Rebecca, and
Mm,
I'm still completely tapped out, right? Like, I don't get to see my friends or my family. I don't get to do the things that are really going to recharge me. And so, how do you expect me to, like, how am I supposed to go on, right? So, there's a lot of hopelessness, Paul. There's a lot of, I think, like, even lack of trust in the system. Like I think people are really struggling, right? Like on every level, it's pervasive. The impact has been pervasive for people. And so I think as a clinician, it's really hard because you empathize, you know that all of this is true, and we have to find ways to be creative to kind of help. But there's only, I feel like we're running into a fair amount of roadblocks, a
mm.
fair amount more so now than before, right? Like typically you could get traction. Yes, there were ongoing long-term chronic issues that people struggled with, but you've got this additional layer now, or I call it like the backdrop, where it just makes everything that much harder or magnified. And so, yeah, it's really difficult for
Yeah.
people to feel hopeful.
Yeah, in as pastors in the church, we find that like it's like we're trying this and trying that. We're just trying stuff,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
at some point, it's becoming like, oh my goodness. I had this feeling, I think, on Tuesday, where last week, where I was just like, oh, come on,
yeah.
I hadn't felt that way. I know that lots of people have with all the different
Yeah,
lockdowns, and
yeah,
and generally I've I've been okay because some of the things that my lifestyle allows for, it
sure.
makes it okay. But I'm just like bumped into this. Come on, like when will
Yeah,
this? Like Lord, when will
yeah.
this end?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
and started to really
Yeah,
to feel it.
absolutely.
So yeah, have you seen anything positive coming out of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a personal perspective, I think, yeah, I've really enjoyed the time that I've had with the girls, and they've obviously been out of school and at home, and they were heavily into sports, and so a lot of our life was, running to different, arenas or fields, and so I do appreciate the fact that it's created a moment to pause, and I think I've really. It was really jarring. I mean, actually, when COVID first happened in March, we were at Ringette Provincials, and the
Oh
girls
wow.
were on the ice, and it was going to be their last year. They'd been playing for 10 years. They were playing, double A, U16, and they get off the ice, and we're told arenas are shut. It's Richmond Hill. Go home. Like, go home. And
Oh
you're just like, it's so disorienting, right? And there's such a
yeah.
loss. Like, so for us as a family, it was an immediate loss. And, we're just like, you kind of knew we had just canceled our trip to Mexico. Like, there were lots of things that were happening, lots of losses compounding for everybody. And I know so many people were in a similar situation. And we drove home, and I remember there just being this like, I felt like someone had died immediately. I felt like someone had died, and I thought, oh, that's an overreaction. Like, nobody's died. It's But then you started to hear more and more about loss and ambiguous loss and a communal grief, and how we were all in
Yeah.
this together, of like people losing and disappointments accumulating on one another. And so I would say my journey has been somewhat different. Like, it started in this really dark and like place of like, this is awful, and then it came to a place of like more of acceptance and understanding that, okay, like, this is the way that it is, and I have to do what I can to make this better and start to see the positives, which I could, in terms of quality time with my children. But I'm also very keenly aware that that's a privileged position, right? Like, that
Yeah.
not everybody else has had that experience. And so when we talk about the positives of COVID, I'm happy to share my personal experience, but I'm also really want to be sensitive that this is not everybody's experience, and
No.
that, financially and work-wise and schooling and education, my kids are old enough that they can take care of their own school for the most part, but if you had like little ones who need
I
attention
know.
constantly, I couldn't do what I'm doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Seriously, I have young adults in the house now, and there was a grief, like someone missed a prom and graduation
Yeah,
and
yeah,
started first year remote and
yeah.
has met one person in their program,
Oh
and
my goodness.
had gone through final
Yeah,
exams alone. Yeah, so but they're young adults,
I
right?
know.
Like, I don't have to.
Yeah, yeah,
I can't imagine having
I know.
toddlers or kids, and I
Absolutely.
do feel for those folks, or people that I have the privilege of being able to work out of my basement, out of my
Yeah,
house.
I know. Yeah,
And I'm aware of that. And so sometimes I do have to stop and think, okay,
yeah.
my experience is limited to my
That's
experience.
right.
And
Exactly. Yeah,
let's be cognizant of the other people
that's right.
around us
Absolutely.
and love and serve as best as we can in that, which as you as a practitioner are also doing, and loving and serving and
Trying.
trying to help as best as we can,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
oh, I hear you. Thanks for that. One of the talking about our kids, one of the things I read on your blog,
Yeah,
on your website for Mother's Day, you talked about being a mother of two daughters.
yeah,
Um, and can you reflect a bit more on that experience of being a mom to teenagers over the last
yeah.
14 months?
Yeah, I mean, it's been so interesting to watch as they kind of enter in, and with your boys as well, Paul. You know that, like, it's heartbreaking, right? Like, the fact that the prom was missed, the fact that these milestones are really, they're not coming back, right? So I think that's the one thing that I've tried really hard to balance that place of, again, like being grateful for what we do have, and recognizing what we have, and also wanting to validate them when they're sad, and when there's disappointments, and when there's another lockdown and they can't do their sports. And it's just like they've been so used to a lifestyle where they just go all the time, and I think in part physically needed that activity, and that kind of, they're driven. So, and not to have that, it's like, what do I do with that? What do I do with all this energy? And what do I do with that? So it's been really a balancing act. And I think that we try to, like look at it from a positive perspective, but I think that can also be very invalidating, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important to really recognize and try and be empathetic to them. And I know one of my daughters has said to me, and I think it's true, and I know other kids I've heard it from, and like, this is ruining our childhood. Like, COVID is really like, it's robbing us of experiences. And I laugh, but I shouldn't laugh because it's not funny. Like, I just think it's a very dramatic way of saying it, but it is actually
It's
true.
true. It's actually true.
Yeah.
Last week we talked with Christy and Lori, and one of the things that Christy talked about was sort of this prayer of like, say anything to God.
Yes, I heard that and loved it.
And
Yeah.
I love that, because I think too often, and even in the church, and this came up over the month around our Mental Health Awareness Month, even in the church, we've said, well, because of our faith, like, we should be happy.
Yeah.
And that's just simply bad theology, is what
Yeah.
I said a couple weeks ago. It's
Yeah.
just bad theology to say that because of God, that we should be happy. But I think because of God, we can be honest, and we can be, open about how we truly are feeling, and that He's there in it. Doesn't necessarily come and just magically,
Oh no.
lift us out of it, but
No.
it's that being honest and being real.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah, well, and I think that, to me, as a psychologist, it's one of the most crucial pieces is the validation, because I think out of invalidation comes so many actually mental health problems, right? And so and I think we do things inadvertently that are really invalidating. And I really liked what Christy said in her interview, and she said she had heard somebody talking, and they were saying, or maybe it was Lori, and she said, the person said, like, don't just say, oh, don't be sad, it's okay, you're fine, like, right? And I think that we do live in a world today where culturally we tell our children, I don't know what you and your wife did, but when your guys were little, if they fell, like, do we not hear people say all the time, you're fine, get up, you're fine, and while I appreciate the intention, and I understand where that's coming from, if you've scraped your knee, or you're hurt, or you're sad, like, telling someone they're fine when they're crying is a mixed message, right? You're not actually validating what they're experiencing at that moment. And I'm not saying we should wallow and kind of, make our children kind of, exaggerate their emotions. But I think there's that fine line between being able to say, yes, this is really difficult, and this is really, and so I think it's the validation part, and empathy, and connecting on that level, and then being able to kind of move into and we can be grateful. But that's kind of later, like when someone's calmer, or someone's feeling a little bit better, and then we can kind of move into that place.
Yeah, it's this instinct to want to fix or protect, or that is misplaced, because it just doesn't allow truth to be truth.
That's right.
The truth is that I do feel terrible.
That's right.
I am sad.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yep.
So, oh no, one of the things that, from my experience with young adults, I've loved this time. It's been hard, because yes, we have been isolated.
Yeah.
Like, and as they grow up into young adults, then all of a sudden the house is a lot smaller. And so we have, like, my one son, he was sleeping and studying and working all in this one room, and finally he said, I just need to not be in this one space. And so we kind of set up, these are the office spaces and workspaces, and these are the home spaces.
Perfect. Yeah.
Anyway, but one thing you said on your blog is that, one request that you have for parents as we are parenting our kids is is to take responsibility for our actions and
Absolutely.
apologize.
Yeah.
Um, and I love that. And that is something that I had to learn this year again in a strong way, because there's just no getting away from the relationship.
That's right.
But that is to say sorry
Yeah.
when I screwed up,
Sure.
and when I make mistakes, and
Right.
again, speak the truth, and be
Absolutely.
honest and take ownership of my own
That's right.
things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh,
I'll own
absolutely.
my stuff, you own your
That's
stuff,
right.
and let's
Yeah.
have relationship.
Yeah. Well, and I think that makes for the best kind of relationship, Paul, because there's authenticity, right? It's not a kid feeling like, oh, well, my mom never apologizes, right? She's always right. It's like, no, I actually need to be able to say, I'm so sorry, right? I've done something to hurt you, or, and I think there is heightened emotion during this time. I think we're all living on a bit of a roller coaster where at any given time you can see how it's kind of playing out in people's lives. I mean, one of the things I've noticed, and this is not just from a clinical perspective, although I've worked with many people who are struggling, but COVID's really created a lot of factions in families, and I don't know, I don't hear necessarily a whole lot about that, but depending on who's adhering to what rules or bubbling with different families, I have quite a few clients who have felt incredibly ostracized because they're adults, but their parents have bubbled with their sibling. And therefore, they have no contact with that part of the family. And it's like the amount of like sessions that I've spent trying to navigate our way through, like, what are you going to do? And are we going to continue to have emotional ties, but yet not any physical kind of connection with people? And it's been really, really
Oh, man.
difficult. So if we think about where everybody's at, I think it's also a harder time to apologize, a harder time to reflect and own it. But it's the most important thing you can do, right?
Yeah, it really is, and for me, I think, getting out of the house and going for a long walk has really helped,
Yeah,
to reset things, and
totally.
do that.
Absolutely.
Um,
Agreed.
so what are some of the other strategies that you have for,
Yeah,
dealing with anxiety, dealing with stress, COVID, those things?
absolutely.
I know that you have a list about 10
I've
things,
got a list. I've
and
got a
we're
list.
gonna put all these items in the chat so that people
Yeah,
don't have to,
yeah,
but,
yeah.
and you can
Um,
always re-listen to things,
Well,
but
and,
yeah.
and I think because I really am, like, even from a clinical perspective, I'm really task oriented. I really want to dive in and help people. And so I thought this was a really good opportunity, Paul, to be able to
Yeah.
sort of offer. And not everything's going to work for everybody, but I do like to think of it in a way of a toolbox, right? That's the analogy I use. And so you're not always going to need a hammer, obviously, right? But there's a place and a time for it. And so I want to just kind of use that as the analogy to jump from in terms of all these different things. And I think having an open mind, right? I think if one is struggling, I think so often there's this tendency to kind of, oh, I don't like to do that. That doesn't work for me. I don't want to. There can be a lot of, again, like walls or obstacles put up in terms of treatment or ideas because people feel so stuck, right, in their
Mm.
emotions, and they feel so stuck. And I understand that these are seemingly insignificant things and they're not a cure-all. They're not going to magically make things better. And so sometimes I've had clients in the years, past, where I remember one in particular, and she looked at me and we were talking about abdominal breathing, and she's like, really? Really? You're going to tell me to breathe? Like, that's what you're going to tell me? And I'm like, but it is. It's one of the most effective ways to calm your central nervous system. Yes, you have to breathe. Like,
Well,
but
the whole breathing with the hand thing that, Lori taught, like, that's amazing.
right. There you go. Right. But they seem like almost cliche or pat answers. And that's not the intention at all. So I definitely start there. That's the first and foundational one. So the breathing, abdominal breathing, is one of the most important things. We're when we breathe from our chest, it's shallow breathing. It sends a message to our brain that something's wrong, that we have reason to be anxious. And so really working on trying to get that breath down into one's belly and in through the nose, out through the mouth, right? So with kids, I always say it's smelling the cookie and cooling the soup, right? Like, you don't blow the soup all over the room, you gotta cool it, and you don't want to make a mess. And so ultimately it's that kind of very basic breathing that we can kind of help bring ourselves back to a place of calm, Paul. And in the world where nothing is really right, nothing feels normal, it's unpredictable, we have no control, it feels like, right? So the rug has been pulled out from under us, and I get that, and I validate that, and we can do things to help stabilize ourselves, right?
That's amazing. I remember going out to go get some groceries with the mask on.
Yeah.
And I came back so anxious, and I
Yeah.
realized it was because I was holding my breath.
Oh, totally.
I was like, I wasn't
Yeah.
breathing, and I
Yeah.
came back really anxious. I'm like, "This is strange. I never feel I'm not anxious about this, because of the science or anything.
Yeah.
I'm okay. Why am I feeling anxious? 'Cause I wasn't breathing."
That's right. Absolutely. It has a really like massive impact on the way that we feel. And I don't think that, that's really insightful of you to be able to connect that. A lot of times people will not think that it has any effect. And so that's where I start. And I often then will go into grounding exercises. So they're very simple and even feel kind of goofy where, I'm like, wiggle your toes. If you can get out in the grass and it's actually not snowing out, like go wiggle your toes, and really, and you don't even have to, you can do it in your shoes, but it helps you feel connected to your body, right? Rubbing your hands together. That's another one, like really just having that sense of I'm here. I'm actually in this chair, right? I'm here. My feet are on the ground. I'm wiggling. I'm feeling myself. Anxiety, the analogy I always use is like that of a helium balloon. So we think about a helium balloon. We let go of the balloon. Where does the balloon go? Right? It's gone. And it's all over there. And don't we feel like that? Like when we're anxious, do you not feel like you've drifted so far away from where you were, right?
Yeah.
So the grounding is just grabbing that balloon, bringing it back, and like, here I am. Okay, I'm right here. Right?
That makes so much sense. Yeah. So I am located somewhere. I'm right here.
Yep.
And that will give me a foundation for the other things I'm sure that you're going to talk about.
Exactly. Totally.
Yeah.
Well, it's being in the here and now. And I love this, be where your feet are. I think that's like a great line, right? And I tell myself that all the time because I'm rarely where my feet are, right? My head is somewhere else. And so ultimately it's being in this moment because we really only have this moment. Like the past is gone, can't do anything about it. The future, sometimes obviously we need to think about things, but I can't be worrying or thinking and obsessing about what's to come. I really have to enjoy this present moment.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. I just went on a long prayer walk the other day in the forest, and I love, like, some people like to sit and reflect. I need to walk because I find that I can just, especially if there's a nice trail, I just focus on one step at a time, and I'm breathing and I'm here. I'm right here. Right.
I love it.
Yeah. So what you've just said makes total sense.
Yeah. You're absolutely in that moment. And that reminds me of, so the next thing is meditation. So that would be number 3, right? We've got the breathing, we've got the grounding exercises, which are super simple. You could do that anywhere. Nobody's going to know what you're doing in your shoes, right? Like wiggle your toes, rub your hands together. Nobody knows what you're doing. And then the third one is meditation. So meditation is simply just a breathing practice, really, right? I like the idea of a guided meditation because I find that a lot of times people it's very hard for me to just sit and be quiet and focus on my breathing. My brain will go elsewhere. So, I like to use a guided meditation. So whatever that is for people, I think it's really important. And one of the things I've learned from meditation is the idea of an elephant and the concept of plodding, right? So as you're walking through the forest, right, Paul, you're becoming an elephant in my mind, and you're plodding right along, and you're there and you're present. And there's a real, obviously weight to an elephant, right? There's this mindful, deliberate kind of, I'm not like flitting around and I'm not anxious and there's this sense of plodding. And so I very much like to offer that as a tool where when we're feeling really unsettled, we need to plod. Right. And that means that like when I'm doing the dishes, right, like I'm plodding, I'm cooking, and I'm plodding.
You watch elephants and they are not in a hurry and they're not anxious, right? There's something calming about watching elephants.
Very calming. Yeah. And I love that. I think that's been a new way for me to connect with that idea and that visual. And I'll often give that to clients and I'm like, okay, your visual is the elephant. You were to be an elephant, right? And go and plod, because we're too easily distracted, and we get like, tossed about more like a wave, and that doesn't happen, right? When we're plotting. So that would be the third one, right? Am I at 4 now? And
That
so
was third. Yep.
yeah. And so we've got kind of that place of really being able to breathe, ground oneself, meditation. And then we look at, so journaling would be kind of the next one. Journaling isn't for everybody. A client taught me this fabulous technique. She turns on her laptop, she closes her eyes, she types, then she hits delete. It's perfect, right?
Yep. Yep.
It's perfect. So journaling can be done in all forms. People verbal journal, although I do think the science is also behind the writing of things down. Carolyn Leaf is a really good resource when it comes to, she wrote a book called, and I have a bunch of books too to offer to people in terms of, from a journaling, it's Switch Your Brain On. And she talks about kind of how to change your thoughts. And I'll reference this later in my list as well. But on her blog, drleaf.com is her website, and her blog talked a little bit, it was December 10th is the date of that blog entry, and she talked about the research behind journaling. And I really love that, because I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, what am I going to write? I'm not going to, like, what am I saying? What is this really doing? It's doing a lot. There's actually science behind the journaling.
Oh yeah, I'd love to see that. I think you refer to that on your blog as well. That
I don't know if I do Carolyn. I know I do Rosenberg, and I'm going to get to Rosenberg.
Oh, okay.
Too, so
Okay.
I'll get there. So the journaling, it's about listing the struggles, no censorship, right? Really, again, it's to say anything, really getting it out there, being honest and being authentic. Naming it. So an emotional vocabulary is really important, Paul. So I wonder in today's day, when people are not sure what they're actually feeling, because there's just such a myriad of emotions, being able to label it is actually very important. Mm-hmm. And so having an emotional vocabulary and starting to develop that, and again, that goes back to childhood. Do we give our children, we talk about a lot of other things. A lot of people really don't know how to label their feelings and talk about them.
I can imagine a lot of kids, when they're expressing feelings, they just get labeled as unreasonable.
Yeah.
That's an unreasonable. Well,
totally.
It's not reason. It's feeling.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Or too sensitive or too much, right? I get a lot of that as well. And like, big emotions, and you've got big, emotions can be big sometimes. And it's important to label it. So Joan Rosenberg does a fabulous job. And that is also on my blog. I do a brief summary of that. And her book is called 90 Seconds to a Life You Love. And so the research behind that, Paul, is that our emotions physically and chemically last in our body for 90 seconds. That's it. Okay. And it's the storyline that keeps them going. So when we feel, because I felt it, I'm sure you felt it, hours, days where you're like feeling these awful things, right? It's like, well, yes, but it's the storyline. So what are you telling yourself that's making this chemical wave happen again? Okay. Yeah. Right. So I think being equipped with, and she did a TED talk on emotional mastery. She has a podcast as well. And I put that in my blog. But it's really interesting. She labels 8 unpleasant emotions. And I found it really, really helpful I memorized them. So there's sadness, there's frustration, anger, helplessness, vulnerability, shame, and embarrassment. And of course, anger. Did I say anger? Anyway, so there's 8 of them. And I do an inventory in my brain. And so if something comes up for me or a client, we go through the 8, right? And it's about being able to articulate, oh yeah, like I see that. And I often ask my clients to distance themselves from their emotions. So I see it like I see a piece of furniture, right? So I see the bookshelf, Paul. I see the printer, right? I see the emotions, but I'm asking, and through meditation, I've learned it's better not to say, I feel that, because then you're just really like, it becomes very much Velcroed to you, rather than I can see it come and I can see it go.
Right. Yeah. And having the language to name different emotions helps us, I think, probably like organize and to be so if I have this negative emotion and all I know is that I'm angry, everything is about anger.
Yep.
or for I have a negative emotion and actually I'm just sad. It doesn't allow me to actually deal with what I'm really.
That's right.
That's what it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So it's
Yeah,
really trying to be the truthful with what the actual experience is so
100%.
that you can approach it in a
That's right.
in an aware way.
That's right.
Self-awareness. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's being able, like, this inventory for me has been super helpful because I don't think I would necessarily have added embarrassment or
Yeah.
shame or
Shame.
vulnerability, right? Like, to the list. Cause I think we go, I can talk a lot about mad, sad, right? I can really identify, oh, I'm mad, oh, I'm sad. Like, and we live in these places that are pretty like polarized. But I love the way Rosenberg really helps you delineate, like, no, actually, you might be hurt, but is there not
Mm,
vulnerability as a result of embarrassment, right?
mm.
You're embarrassed with shame there. So it helps you dig a lot deeper without getting caught. Like, I feel like the inventory helps you again. It's like furniture, right? I can like organize my furniture. It's easier to do that than sometimes trying to like understand what you're feeling emotionally.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like, and going back to the conversation around like in the house with my kids, something happens and I'm grumpy at them about
Yeah,
something, some
yeah,
dishes or something
yeah,
stupid.
yeah,
And then I just had to walk away and think, what's really going on?
yeah,
I'm like,
totally.
oh, guys, I'm just really sad
Yeah, yeah,
about something else. And I'm sorry
yeah,
I took it out on you in
right,
anger, but I
right.
was actually sad or I was
Yeah.
stressed or
Yes,
something.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
wow.
And that goes back to that idea of being authentic and apologizing and helping to model for them that, it's okay, Dad, you're human, right? And you can own this and teach me how to do it. Because
Mm,
otherwise, how are they going to learn that emotional vocabulary, Paul?
right. Oh, okay. Yeah, 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 for sure.
Right?
That's
So
good.
just connecting kind of those dots. So really being able to look at her, I think like she is really, that book to me is like a manual for how to deal with unpleasant emotions. So to me, it's like, oh, well, here we are in the middle of a pandemic. Like, who isn't having unpleasant emotions? This is kind of a must have book, right?
Okay, we'll put that in the notes in the
Yeah.
chat,
Yeah.
and to let everyone know about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the next skill then in the tool is metacognition. So metacognition is very simply like thinking about your thinking, right? So being able to be aware of those storylines. And so, I love when clients say to me, the story I'm telling myself is this,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
It
yeah.
doesn't mean it's true necessarily, right? But
Yeah.
they're aware enough to be able to recognize that this is the story that I'm telling myself. And that's what keeps things going. So I often use the example of a record, right? And the record's playing, and do we have enough self-awareness to go, oh, that's the self-pity record, right? And now I'm feeling really sorry for myself, and I'm just kind of letting it go over and over instead of saying, no, changing the record. I'm actually not going to let myself go down that path.
Right. No, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So the metacognition is there, and then looking for the good in terms of, so being able to look at, okay, so I see that this isn't helpful, right? So the lens of, is it helpful? Is it not helpful? And then
Mhm.
really focusing on what is helpful for me. What can I do? And I've really embraced the word and lately. So even in our interview, it's like, yes, this is true. This is
Oh, yeah.
difficult, and we can do this. Right. So it's not negating, it's not saying, but we should focus on the positive. No.
Right.
And we can focus on the positive.
That's good. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I feel like this year has been living in a lot of both ends. Like,
Absolutely.
I'm happy and I'm sad.
And yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And we have, I think it's a learning process. So that's kind of one of my last points is growth mindset. How do we get to that point where we can hold both emotions? Because that takes a certain amount of maturity, right? And a certain amount of, it's hard. It's hard to be both. And I think as human beings, one of the other things that meditation taught me was the concept of good, bad, hard to tell. We like to put things in categories, right? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Well, actually, most of them are hard to tell. We don't know what's going to come out of the bad stuff and what's going to come out of the good stuff, right? And so it's being able to hold that place of saying, I'm learning, and that's where I'm growing, how I'm growing. And I think that helps to create a little bit more room then for when things happen, we can pause and reflect and think about our thinking and then move in a more mindful, plodding manner that can hopefully have more positive results.
Love it. I love it. That the growth mindset, I think for me, I've named that as humility. Like, not, and too much. Oftentimes we want to understand, but in trying to understand something or what I'm feeling, I want to stand over it and master it as opposed to stand under it and
Right.
have a humility to learn from something.
Yeah.
Like some of my most deepest learning and growing has happened in moments of humility where it's just, here's what's coming at me, and I'm just going to embrace it and not try
Right.
to master it, fight against it,
Yeah.
control it. It's just receive it, right?
That's right.
And and it comes to my faith, and the way that uh, I relate to God. It really is that receiving, and stop trying to grasp, but
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
receive,
Yeah.
because even the grasping becomes a task, right?
Well, it's
Even
striving, right, Paul? Like,
striving, exactly. I
yeah.
had that conversation earlier. Like, let's
Yeah.
just stop striving and
Right.
just receive and
That's
stop. Because if we keep wanting to strive and we're just not getting there, like how discouraging and
right.
damaging is that,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
You
that's
know?
the very definition of frustration, right? Because you're being
Okay.
blocked. And so you're
Yeah.
striving and you feel blocked, and therefore you're going to have that emotion, right?
Right. So let's summarize. You said the breathing, the
Breathing.
abdominal breathing.
Yep.
Okay. Grounding. So this is just making you feel your body in a space.
Absolutely.
The meditation or the plodding like an
Yep.
elephant. Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely.
Journaling was the other
Mhm.
one.
Yep.
Naming and
Yep.
having emotional vocabulary.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Metacognition. This is being able to see above the thinking and say, actually, these are the tapes that are playing or
That's
the
right.
record that's going
Yes.
on. And then looking for the good, the helpful versus unhelpful,
Yep.
and also being able to embrace the and. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yep.
And then the last one I think you said was the growth mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
And the only one I would say in between the metacognition is Rosenberg in terms of the emotional vocabulary and being able
Okay.
to, yeah, and recognize those 8 unpleasant emotions.
Oh, okay. That was a separate. Yeah. Okay. So that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it,
Right.
it can all really, I mean, they're all
Sure. Yeah.
flowing into one another, right?
So you'll send those to me, and I'll post them in the chat when as
Sounds
this
good.
is going. I might
I'm
even
happy
pop
to
them
do
up
that.
on the screen in a magic title or something.
Yes, absolutely. Sounds good, Paul.
That's great. Wow, this has been so rich. It's actually really help me understand my own experience of how I've been coping and,
I'm glad.
even my own journey uh,
Well, it
with
impacts
God.
each and every one of us. I really do believe that. Like, I think, yes, there are clinical levels of struggle, but we're all struggling. Like, this is, and to me, these things apply. That's why, I get really excited. I remember a ringette mom once said to me, like, if I ever ask you a question about psychology, like, you go like on and on about, and I felt bad, but it's like, well, I'm really excited and I'm really hopeful that it will actually help, right? Because that's the goal.
So I guess these are some strategies for coping, some ways to move forward. But there are times where, probably a lot of times, where we actually just need help of a professional too.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Like,
I think that's where you want people to feel like they can reach out. I think it's kind of sad right now, there's a real shortage of help. The wait lists are longer than they've ever been. So as much as I want people to feel like, yes, they can reach out and that will hopefully help, I think there's also something, and I do this when I'm writing to potential clients and saying, this is how long the wait list is or whatever. I think it's important to also empower people where they are, right? So I'm not suggesting that replaces the professional help, but it certainly is a place to start. Like, wherever we are, I think there's the hope would be that we can find some point of traction, Paul, where we can, and even have micro goals, right? Like, I
yeah,
think it's really important that people don't feel like they have to achieve this. It's really
yeah.
about going from here to here, right? Like, I speak in millimeters, right? And so drops, I often talk about drops. Like, how do we add drops to your bucket, right? Like, these are
Mm,
very small measurements because we're not looking for big things. We're looking for consistent small things.
mm, yeah.
So I
So
do,
everyone can at least breathe.
yes,
Just at least breathe and take a
yes,
moment.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And wiggle their toes, hopefully,
Wiggle your
right?
toes. Yeah. No, that's good. I that's super helpful. Yeah. Well, Rebecca, it's been great to talk to you, and so
Oh,
thank you so much
likewise, my
for
pleasure,
this.
Paul.
And I hope that we can hear more of your point.
Oh,
So
well, I would be honored to be invited back to participate in some other thing. Thank you.
we'll do that again for sure. Wow, that was an amazing session with Rebecca. I so appreciated her perspective, and I could really see a lot of those practices or tools that she gave us in my own life, and the things that have helped me in coping in this time, but also in other seasons of my life where there was anxiety um, or just negative thinking or tapes that were playing. So I really appreciated that. Um, so we're going to wrap up soon, but I noticed there's a bit of or a lot of chatter and comments in the chat. If there's anyone that has any questions, maybe I can try and clarify something that Rebecca said, or uh, you know, maybe give you a story of something. If you have a question you just want to throw in the chat, that would I'd love that. But thanks for joining us. I know this has been an important conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. We don't want to ever get to a place where, or go back to that place where we're not talking about these important things in the church, because we know that Jesus is our hope. And but we don't want to treat that lightly as a like a trite saying. Well, like God's with you, and so you'll be fine. That's the truth. But there is this both and, right? Like I feel really crappy, or I'm feeling really anxious, and God's with me, and I feel really bad. And so, like, to embrace the reality of your thinking or who you are, um, and get real. I mean, that's the slogan, right? Get real. Just be honest about who you are and how you're doing. So, anyway, next week we have Benita Eby, who will be joining us, and Benita's a former pastor at WMB. And after her own season of burnout, after she recovered and rested and recovered, she has now become a burnout expert and seeks to help and educate and prevent burnout. And so she's going to be coming to talk to us about burnout, about this sense of languishing. So that's a new thing that people have been talking about, which is like, I'm neither really bad and I'm not very good. I'm just kind of meh. And so this idea of languishing. So she's going to talk to us about that, and also compassion fatigue, that sense of like caring for people, particularly for frontline workers, or if you're caring for people in your family, or your neighbors or whatever. But there's this compassion fatigue that can set in. And so we look forward to talking to Bedina next week live um, on Wednesday at noon. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention, that in 2 weeks, and this will be posted on our website on events. We're hosting, so June 8th, Tuesday, we're hosting a workshop. This will be a live Zoom workshop called Resilience: A Balanced Approach to Self-Care. And it's about maintaining our emotional well-being. And so that's being hosted by Barnabas Missions, and Wayne Porty is hosting that. And we'll be having a professional therapist and speaker, Anne-Marie Covert, who will be leading a Zoom workshop with some question and answer. So, and Wayne's just posted that in the comments. Thanks, Wayne. So, everyone, I'll say goodbye for now. This has been an amazing conversation, part of our May Mental Health Awareness Month. But let's keep the conversations going. If the church, if people at the church, pastors, or your home group leader, or anyone can be of help to you, and you just want to talk, please be in touch with us. Let us know. There's various ways to contact us. Best way is to just at least get to the website, wmbchurch.ca, and there'll be contact information, or just put it out there in the WMB Church community, the Facebook community. That will pray for you. We'll be in touch. There's just people in the church that want to love on other people that are having challenges, and so please be in touch. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us. I'll say goodbye for this week.